All right, everybody, welcome to Shit or Shift, the choice in change. There's about 170 of you that signed up for today's webinar. I'm grateful for you. If this is the first time that we're meeting, hi, my name's Betsy. I'm in San Diego, California, and I am a coach and communications specialist. My background is in sport. I have a degree in psychology, but I'm not a sports psychologist. I love that profession and emulate it in some ways, but that's not what I do. This is a tricky situation when I was thinking about how to start today's webinar. It's called Shit or Shift, and we are undeniably, as a global community, going through some shit right now. And I thought, okay, what examples do I want to use? How do I want to start and give some really strong examples of the different kinds of shit that people are experiencing? And as I started to think, I thought, well, no, that's not a good example because compared to this, that's a small thing. And no, I can't use that example because I know someone else that's going through this. And then I stopped and I laughed because just last night I was listening to Brene Brown's new podcast, Unlocking Us. And the episode was on what she calls comparative suffering. And it's when we give ourselves or deny ourselves permission to feel something in relation to somebody else's suffering. And that's exactly what I was doing as I started to think about how do I want to intro all the shit that we're going through. There's a variety of people and professions that are on today's webinar. And the point that I want to take away from this is that whatever shit you're going through right now, it's your shit and it all matters. In the podcast, Brene said there's no giant leaderboard where your suffering doesn't rank quite as high as someone else, so it's invalid. What I'd like you to do right now is I want you to call to mind 2 or 3 things that you're going through, 2 or 3 really shitty things that you're going through right now, and take a moment to identify what those are. Some of you are out there saying it's a hell of a way to start a morning, Bets. Trust me, there's a purpose here. Take a second to think about 2 or 3 things that are really difficult for you right now. Once you've brought those to mind, the question I have for you is, are you going through some shit or are you growing through some shift? And this is where people shake their heads and they say, Bets, nothing has changed about my situation. The only thing that you've done is change a few words around. I'm still going through some shit. You are. And this is a situation, by this, I mean, not just this webinar, but this global pandemic that we are all experiencing is one of those situations where it's not black or white. It's not either or. This has become a yes and situation. Yes, you are absolutely 100% going through some shit. Whether you've lost your job or you've been asked to take a furlough or a pay cut, or you know someone who's experiencing those things. If you're a student athlete and you've lost your season, or you know someone who's lost their season, there's so many different types of shit that we're going through right now. It's a global shitstorm in a lot of ways. So are we going through some shit? Absolutely, 100%. And all of it's valid, whatever is true for you. The second question, are you going through some shift, growing through some shift specifically? Asks us to take a different perspective. And here's the reason I start with this question. Shit happens, and shit's always going to happen. Shift is a choice, and it's always your choice. As we go throughout today's presentation, I'm going to give you tools to start to take the shit that you're going through and use it as fertilizer for future growth. So how do we do this? This is one of my favorite quotes since the first day I read it, and it says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose, and in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So we get to choose our response. Global pandemic, how do we respond? And the question I keep coming back to during this time is, who do I want to be during this pandemic? When I look back on this, whether that's months from now or years from now, who do I want to say that I was during this time? And the metaphor I've been thinking about recently is, it's like you went to the gym and you got on the treadmill, some of us call it the dreadmill. You got on the dreadmill to do a 5-minute warm up and the machine broke. And all of a sudden you can't get off until you've run a marathon. Not only that, but because it's broken, it keeps changing elevation. So you don't know what today's going to bring. And the mileage log is off. So you know you have to run a marathon, but you don't know where in the race you are. And that's exactly what it's like to be alive in this time, especially in relationship to sports and athletics. We know that we're in this thing, We can't get off of it. We can't get out of it. And we know it's going to be a long time, but we don't know exactly how long and where we are in the process. It's interesting because in the last, I'll say, week, maybe 10 days, there's been a noticeable shift, specifically in athletics, I think in the larger community as well. And that shift is that the initial shock of we need to stay at home, we need to shelter in place, we're facing something that is much bigger than many of us have ever experienced in our lives, and that this is serious. That initial shock has worn off, and in its place has come a settling of sorts. But with that settling has come depression and increased anxiety and stress, sometimes apathy. And I want to start today. I know I asked you to bring to mind 2 or 3 shitty things that you're going through right now. I want to start today by talking about the elements of shift. And where we need to begin when we talk about shift is working ourselves through the 3 areas you see on the right side of your screen. So feel, think, and do. Let's start with what we're feeling. And to do that, I want you to start by naming what it is that you're feeling. I'll tell you why this is important in a minute. If you've yet to read Brene Brown's Dare to Lead, I'm a big Brene Brown fan. I think her work is incredibly relevant during this time because she is a shame researcher. She's researched fear. Those are things that we're experiencing in large amounts, individually and globally. She has a great passage from the book Dare to Lead, and I've got it over here. So I want to read it to you now. What she says in Dare to Lead is she says, we are managing during a time of scarcity or deep uncertainty. When we're managing during this time, it's imperative that we embrace the uncertainty. There is incredible relief and power in naming and normalizing fear and anxiety. We have to find the courage to look back at the people who are looking at us for leadership and say, this is difficult. There are no simple answers. There is pain and there is fear, and that would be easy for us to unload on others, but that would be unfair and out of our integrity. We will walk through this in a way that makes us feel proud. It will be hard, but we will do it together. And I love that quote because as coaches, as parents, as educators, as managers, as people who love other people, there are likely people in our lives that are looking to us for leadership. They're looking to us to say, what do we do? And this is an unprecedented situation. So nobody knows what we should do. The phrase I find myself using often is, what's best right now is whatever's best for the people that you care about. And when in doubt, lead with kindness. So we're going to start by naming it. And Brene said there's incredible power in naming what it is that we feel. In order to do this, if you have your cell phone nearby, and if you don't, go ahead and grab it now. I want you to pick up your cell phone. And I'll back out of the presentation here. And what I'd like you to do is I would like you to go to www.menti.com. Menti is short for Mentimeter. So go to www.menti.com. And then I'd like you to enter the code on the initial screen, 637982. And there's a question there, and there's 3 response spaces. The question is, what are you currently feeling? And I've had people say, well, can you clarify, Betsy? Is it what I'm currently feeling in relationship to work, in relationship to my family, in relationship to a global pandemic? The answer to all those questions is yes. Whatever you're feeling, in whatever context you want to put that in, because the reality is we who feel occupy all those spaces. So what I'd like you to do, go to menti.com, use the code 637982, and enter 3 words that describe what you're currently feeling. And we'll see the responses here as they come up. So anxious, anxiety are the biggest ones so far. Frustrated and frustration are close seconds. Unsure, uncertain, overwhelmed, doubt, sad, scared, lonely, disconnected, hopeless. On the periphery, I'm seeing more positives. Family, love, engaged, hope, choice, relaxed, love, Okay, last 10 seconds or so, if you'd like to submit your response to this question. Thank you for those that already have. All right. It's safe to say, given the current information that we have based on the data, anxious is number one, anxiety and frustrated are close after anxious, and frustration is the next in line. So, overall, feelings of anxiety, feelings of frustration. And this has been true every time I've done this presentation. The reason I want to start here is we need to identify what it is that we feel. So we just named what it is that we're feeling. Anxiety or anxious, frustration or frustrated were the results that came back in mass. Here's what happens when we're able to name our emotions. And I'll start by mentioning a study that was done, I believe, at the University of Washington. This was years ago. And they took a group of participants and they brought them in and they showed them very violent pictures, pictures of people undergoing surgeries or people who'd been involved in accidents. And what they had done beforehand was they attached electrodes to the participants' brains so that they could see the brain activity as they showed them these violent pictures. Appropriately so, the middle part of the brain, the amygdala, which is largely responsible for our flight or fight response, for our stress response, for our the reactive part of our brain, that was what lit up on the monitors. They then trained these participants for 8 weeks in various mindfulness practices. One of those practices was the practice of labeling their thoughts and emotions. They then brought participants back at the end of the 8 weeks, reattached the electrodes, showed them the same violent pictures, except this time they had the practice of naming their emotions. So they could see the picture and say, okay, this is fear. What they noticed, and what was fascinating about this study, is instead of the middle part of the brain reacting, the amygdala, it was the frontal cortex that started reacting. And this part of the brain is classically known for strategic thinking, logical thinking, wisdom. So when we hear that term rewiring our brain, sometimes we think of it as, a fancy term for what could happen if we get really good at meditation. Labeling, something as simple as naming your emotion and writing it down, assigning it a label, allows you to start to move your thoughts from a more reactive part of your brain into a more strategic part of your brain. And especially when we find ourselves anxious and frustrated in this unknown landscape of a global pandemic, it's really important that we have access to that more strategic part of our brain. And we can start to do that by labeling. Once we label it, once we write it down, we at the same time acknowledge what it is that we feel. And acknowledging, we can move towards acceptance. And this is a word I think that often gets misinterpreted. So sometimes we think that if I accept something, that means I agree with it. Not true. You can accept something. You can understand that it exists. You can acknowledge that it's present without agreeing with it. You don't even have to like it. Most of us aren't a big fan of a global pandemic. And yet accepting that this is our current reality is what would benefit us if we hope to take the next steps forward. So the S in shift, start by naming it, whatever it is that you feel. And if you want, you can do this as a daily exercise if it would benefit you. The H in shift stands for have clarifying conversations. And this is where feel begins to intersect with think. Have clarifying conversations. I'm going to mention these in two categories. The first is questions that you can ask to have clarifying conversations with someone that you're working with or someone you're in close relation with or maybe responsible to. The right side of the screen is going to be questions that you can ask yourself, having clarifying conversations with ourselves about what's true for us. So on the left, clarifying conversations, identifying with if you're working from home. And I love there was something I read on social media the other day that said, we're not working from home. We're staying at home due to a global pandemic and also trying to work. These are very different things. It's not casual Friday where you decide to skip the office and work from home. So identifying with those that we're responsible to in a work scenario, what needs to be done? Why does it need to be done? Not because I said so type of why, but what's the purpose? If we understand the purpose, we can arguably do better quality work because we're working towards a specific why, a specific outcome. Who is responsible for what? So what part do I need to do? How much time might that take? What's expected of me? And then when does it need to be done by? So what's the ideal deadline or due date? On the right-hand side, what you see there is questions for having a clarifying conversation with yourself. And when we talk about anxiety and frustration, the two big words that came up on our word cloud today, these are crucially important questions to answer. So what drains or depletes me? As we go throughout our day, you might notice that if you have X number of Zoom meetings or a certain amount of screen time, that you find yourself drained or depleted. You might also find that if you've been sitting for a long period of time without standing up or moving around, that that's something that drains you as well. So identifying what those things are and what they look like in your current environment. Also, flip side is what energizes or refreshes me. And these can be small things, things like standing up, stretching, drinking a glass of water, maybe having more coffee or less coffee. That could be energizing as well. Sleep is a big thing. And with all the precautions that are put forth of best practices for staying healthy during COVID-19, sleep is one of the top. If we're not getting good sleep, we know our immune system is compromised. Sleep is hard because we're stressed and anxious and frustrated. So what do you need to do to get some sort of rest? For me, it's been typically 2 times a day. I might take a 15, 20-minute nap. These are short naps, but I know that I feel more refreshed after I take them, and I'm not getting the same quality sleep I was at night. So these have become more important for me. So what does that look like for you? And then where am I today? Not physically. Most of us are home, unless you're an essential worker and you're going into an office or a building with others. But where are you emotionally? Where are you physically? What does it feel like to be you in the space that you occupy today? Understanding where we are allows us to better set expectations with ourselves of what's possible for us today. And this is going to change from day to day. And then how will I communicate my needs, especially with the people that we live with? And there's that hypothetical question that we used to ask, who's the one person you want to be stuck with on a deserted island? Now it's become, who do you want to shelter in place with during COVID-19 for an extended period of time? And a lot of us were unaware that that was the question that was going to be asked before we stopped and we stayed. So we may not have as much choice in who we're with. Maybe you love who you're with. Regardless of your relationship, it's important to understand, how are you going to communicate what it is that you need to the people that you're sharing a space with? What does that look like for you? Moving forward, options. Options are a good thing. And especially as leaders, I know there's a lot of coaches on today's call. Whether you're, again, a coach, a parent, an educator, a mentor, a leader of any kind, and I truly believe everyone has the ability to lead. When you're interacting with other people, it's really important, especially during this time, that we give them options, because choice is something that a lot of people are feeling stressed or strained about right now. There's so many things that have been taken away from the way they're used to living their lives, that our ability to give them small choices, even such as, how do you want to communicate when we are going to be in contact with each other? Those small choices add a little bit of relief to that anxiety. They can help mitigate that frustration in small ways. So when you're thinking about options, especially for how you're going to stay in contact with certain people, the 3 areas I'd like you to think about are modality, duration, and frequency. So what mode of communication are you going to use to interact with the people that you're keeping in contact with? Some people love text. Some people are better talking on the phone. Some people hate talking on the phone. Some people love to see the face-to-face interaction of Zoom calls. And depending on where that call is during their day, they may be exhausted and they'll say, hey, can we switch over to phone? Thinking about those different modalities, asking people to choose, if we're going to meet on this day, what form would you like our meeting to take? And then allow them to make some small choice in that. Similarly, when we talk about duration and frequency, how often are we going to be meeting and for how long? Shorter meetings have tended to be a little more productive. Even people seeing that hour block pop up on a Zoom call, it's like, oh man, I'm gonna be sitting for an hour again. I've already sat for so many hours during the day, even if they have a standing desk. So think about what's essential in your meetings. What's the purpose, right? Identifying the why. And then how much time might you need to accomplish that objective or that purpose? And even if you don't accomplish the whole thing, what could success look like if you didn't accomplish everything? What's essential so that we can make the most of our time, but also give people some greater choice about how they use their time? And if you have questions as we go throughout today's session, please drop them into the chat. I'll circle back at the end and answer those questions in the order that they came in. The I in shift is identify your controllables. And this is where we start to move out of feeling, through feeling and thinking, and into thinking. So I'm going to ask you to think about a few things here. And I'll preface this with one of my favorite stories, which is the story of Charlie Jones. Charlie Jones was a famous broadcaster. He's in the NFL Hall of Fame for broadcasting. And at the Olympic Games that were back in the mid 90s in Atlanta, this was Charlie's third Olympic Games. So he's a seasoned broadcaster. Very excited for the assignments to come out. The assignments come out, and Charlie is assigned to rowing, kayaking, and canoeing, which, especially in the mid 90s, not a lot of people watch these sports. And in addition, the venue for these sports was about an hour outside of Atlanta. So it wasn't like Charlie could do his job and then pop over next door and watch some of the more popular sports. So Charlie was bummed, but Charlie was also a professional. And as a professional, he knew he needed to get to work. And work for Charlie meant starting to do the athlete interviews. And he'd ask them questions like, how does your lane assignment affect your race strategy? Or what do you do if it starts to rain or the winds shift dramatically on race day? Regardless of the country of origin of the athlete that he was speaking with, almost all of the athletes had some semblance of the same response. And that response was, Charlie, that's outside my boat. What he learned is that this population of athletes had gotten so intentional about what they could control and what they couldn't control. And they were only going to devote their time and effort and energy to what they could control, what was inside their boat. So what I'd like you to do is take just 60 seconds and think about these two questions. What can I control? What's in your boat? And then also, what can't I control? What's outside of my boat? And you can put this in whatever context it would be beneficial. If you want to talk about your home life, what's inside your boat while you're working at home? What's outside your boat? If your kid or your dog runs across the screen, say hello, introduce them to the people on the call. So what are we stressed about currently that we can control? And what's making us feel anxious or frustrated that's outside of our boat, something that we can't control? Make a few notes for yourself, and then we'll move forward. You can take this as an action item from today and spend a little more time on this list at the end of this call. Inside your boat, outside your boat. This is also a great question to ask the people that you are staying at home with so that they can start to be intentional about how they spend their effort and time and energy. Are they stuck on the controllables? Well, I know you don't like this, but this is how it is right now. Or are they more focused on the things that they have control over? So once you've identified your controllables, the next step in shift, the F, is flex to fit what's needed now. What I'd like to do is I'm going to go back to Mentimeter. So go ahead and grab your phones. And I have a quick question for you. And that question is, I'd like you to answer what you see on the screen. Again, if you go to menti.com, use the code 637982. I'd like to know how many of you on today's webinar have used TRX straps before. So if you're familiar with what TRX straps are, if you've used them in the past, put yes. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, go ahead and put no. This is going to influence how I frame the conversation moving forward. Okay. So of our group today, it looks like many of you have. There's some that haven't, which is perfect. I'll give a brief explanation and then we'll come back to how this applies to what we're doing today. TRX straps are what you see in the visual there. So this is a gal using them. They have an anchor point up high, and then they're adjustable straps that have a handle at the bottom. There's different parts of the strap around the handle that are Velcro, so you can make the loops bigger or smaller, and then you can adjust the straps to be longer or shorter. TRX works specifically with your own body weight. So all you really need is an anchor point, and then whatever you bring, so your body, in order to do a variety of exercises. And you can use the handles as things to hold on to, or you can put your feet into the loops and use the handles for your feet, and there's a variety of exercises. So it comes in a small package. It comes in a little mesh bag that you can take anywhere. And this is something that you'll often see in gyms. A lot of colleges and universities have them as well because it's portable and it uses your body weight in a way that gives you a great workout. So the F, flex to fit what's needed now. And this is where think starts to intersect with do. So we're moving from feel to think, starting down the path towards do. What I love about TRX, so TRX uses your body weight. And in the context of what we're going through right now, the translation of that for me is using what you have. We may not have the same resources that we would if we were working from an office. We don't have the same abilities to sit down and have a conversation with someone sitting beside them that we did a couple weeks ago. So using what you have now to do what needs to be done in a way that best serves the people that you're responsible to. So using what you have. The second part, where your feet are makes it easier or harder. What I love about TRX is that if I'm holding the straps with my hands and I've got the anchor point up there, I can walk my feet further away or closer to the anchor point, and that's going to make whatever exercise I'm doing easier or harder. For me, the translation of this during this time is understanding that while we need to be grounded, we need to be where our feet are, we can shift small things by making small choices to make the workload or the necessary things that we have to do that day feel a little easier. Or if we've got more energy and we feel like we can tackle bigger things today, we can make things a little more challenging than they might be. Knowing that this is going to shift from day to day. And there's so much that's unknown about this time. One of the fun comics I saw recently was, it had the days of the week and it said Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, weekend. And that was before COVID-19. And then below it, it said now. And it just said yesterday, today, tomorrow. So our perspective has gotten narrow. And it's important within that perspective to identify, where am I at today? That was one of those clarifying conversation questions I mentioned earlier. So where are you today? And where might I need to move, or how might I need to shift in order to make what it is that I'm responsible for doing today feel a little easier or be a little more challenging? And then finally, find your anchor. I talked about how TRX works with any kind of anchor point. So if I was at the park, I could toss my TRX straps over, let's say, the backboard support on the basketball court. And then I could do a workout there. I could put it through, kind of the V in a tree, and I could use that as an anchor. In the context of what we're experiencing right now, finding your anchor, seeking support. Is that someone that's inside your home? Is that someone inside your family? Is that someone in your team or organization? Who can we anchor ourselves to so that when we feel a little overwhelmed by that anxiety and that frustration that you mentioned earlier today, that we have some stability? And understanding that just like TRX, I can find a variety of anchor points and still get a good workout in. We may need a variety of anchors in our lives to help us ground ourselves and to help us feel like we're able to do the work that's required of us. What does support look like? So we talk about support, and this is a comic that I love, and this is a play off of the 5 love languages. So if you haven't read the 5 love languages, the 5 love languages are acts of service, words and affirmations, quality time, physical touch, and receiving gifts or giving gifts. So these have been slightly adapted in wording to be the love languages for introverts. The reason I wanted to share this with you today, 1, humor. Humor is so appreciated during this time. 2, support for us can look very different than support for someone that we are living in the same space with. Or if we're alone, support for us can look very different than the person that we are seeking to anchor to. So if my love language is, I really care about you, I want to communicate often and frequently, I want to do it, via Zoom every time because I need to see your face and I really, really care about you. For someone that is different than me, that speaks a different love language, support can look incredibly different. And so they feel overwhelmed by my checking in incessantly and the need for face-to-face visuals. And that doesn't feel supportive at all for them. So understanding, what does support look like for ourselves, for our family, for our loved ones, for our team, for our organization, and asking the question, how can I best support you during this time? Again, coming back to those elements we talked about before, giving them choices in terms of modality, duration, and frequency. So we can all learn to speak another language. I know at the beginning of this, people thought, oh, I'm going to teach my kids a different language, or I'm going to learn a different language. My ask here is that we learn the language of support for the people that we seek to support, but also learning how to convey to others or communicate to others what our support language looks like. So how can they best support us if they choose to? The T in shift stands for take purposeful action. And this is where we move fully into the last component from feel, think, do. So this is where we can take some meaningful action that's going to set us up for the path forward, knowing that, again, the treadmill's broken. We know we have to run a marathon. We don't know where we are in that epic journey. We didn't train for this. So it's likely going to be hard. It's going to be long. What can we do that's next? And as I was thinking about this part, the visual you see with the steps, when I was playing field hockey back in high school, I grew up in the Bay Area, and my high school wasn't far from Stanford University. And during field hockey season, I think every other Friday, we would go over to Stanford Stadium and we would run the bleachers. and it was 88 steps to the top of the bleachers. I remember counting one day. And the thing that I love about stair workouts back in high school and then every time I've done them since is that if you're doing a stair workout, you can't look any further than the step ahead of you, especially if you're doing something fancy like, instead of 1 foot per step, you're doing 2 feet per step, or you're skipping a step. You have to stay fully focused on where your feet are and what comes next so that you can avoid eating it. The same thing applies to what we're going through right now. The future is uncertain, it's unknown. Timelines are something that we have very little knowledge about, both in how long will life be the way it is, when can we return to what we remember of normal, knowing that it's no longer a new normal, it's a next normal. So what does normal look like for us next? As we do this, there's 3 things that I'd like you to keep in mind. So the stairs of choice, chance, and change. And I like to say in everything that we do, we have a choice. Now, we may not like the choices that we have, or our choices may feel very small, but we do have them. Based on the choices that you have, if we take a chance, then we can likely create some change that wasn't present in our day-to-day, in our now. An example I used to use back when we were experiencing that old version of normal was, let's say on Monday, I decide that I'm going to go to a happy hour for young professionals in my area. And I said, yeah, I'm going to go, feeling like energized. My introvert is saying, yes, this is a good thing. We're going to get out of our comfort zone. And then Friday rolls around and I'm sitting on the couch and it's an hour before the event starts. And I'm like, I am really regretting that decision. And what if I didn't go and I stayed here and I started watching that documentary on Netflix that I've heard so many great things about? So I have choices. My introvert self knows that if I stay here with Netflix and the documentary, I'm going to feel really good. My introvert also knows that the only way I'm ever going to experience something different in my life is if I take a chance. And so I go, and it turns out, I meet someone in my area that's working on similar things or that I can learn from that I never would have met if I didn't take that chance. And that causes some shift or change in my life. So looking at what's on your plate right now, what choices do you have? And then maybe taking a chance and doing something in a different way that you've done before. This is a wonderful time for innovation and creativity. It can feel harder during this time or challenging to be creative, but because this is unprecedented, because there is no playbook, there is no script, we get to write our own. So what choices do you want to make? What changes do you want to make? And then what is it that you need to take a chance on in order to make that change? At the bottom, you see the light bulb and movement and self-care. This is something that I alluded to earlier. And if we're taking purposeful action, if you scale it back to what can I do that my future self will thank me for, get up and move. When we feel anxious, when we feel frustration, those feelings have biological effects in our body. And combating those biological effects with the release of endorphins and adrenaline by moving our body, by getting outside. If there's sunshine where you live, then getting some sunshine, absorbing some vitamin D, doing something that incorporates movement so that somatically we can move through what it is that we're feeling and be able to start to adopt a mindset that would allow us to make different choices. So making your plan, if you look at shift, start by naming it. Whether those are your emotions, writing them down, or even the thoughts that you're having, write them down, name them, let's make them real. Let's start to take back some of our power and our control. Have clarifying conversations with yourself and with other people. So what conversations do you need to have to level set expectations so that everyone can find success? Identify your controllables, what's inside your boat, and also identify what you can't control, what's outside your boat. And if it benefits you, do that for the people that you're living with or working closely with during this time. Flex to fit. Remember the TRX steps. So how can we adjust where we are and what resources we have to do the work that needs to be done in a way that we're likely unaccustomed to doing it? And then take purposeful action. What's the next step for yourself personally, for the project that you're working on, for the team that you're working with or responsible for? What action can you take where you've got your eyes focused on the next thing that needs to happen, knowing that we're not really sure at this point how many steps there are to the top of the stadium. But we can be confident that if we take the next step, eventually we're going to get there. So start by making your plan. The last thing that I want to do before we move into resources and questions is I want to do one more poll. So go ahead and grab your phone here if you will. And I'd like you to answer the following question. And this question is, what is the most important quality of resilience? And your options are determination, optimism, and flexibility. So these three, I want you to cast your vote now for what is the most important quality of resilience. If we're going to be resilient during this time, what's the essential thing that we need to have between these three options? Again, choices are a good thing. So I'm giving you three choices here. You get to pick the one that speaks to you, and then we'll see what you come up with as a group. Okay. Since the beginning, the leader has been flexibility. That seems to be holding strong. Over half of those of you on the webinar today chose flexibility. Optimism came in second, roughly a third of you, and then determination was the least selected item. All of these are important. And I say all of these are important, and I ask that question because what's interesting is that I would have chosen flexibility too if I hadn't had some recent education. I love yoga, and I think, okay, uncertainty, I have anxiety, I've got frustration. I can manage those in this time if I have the ability to be flexible, if I can let go of what I thought this was going to look like or what I would ideally do during this time and be more flexible. What I learned recently is that the most important quality in order to be resilient is actually optimism. And I want to double click on optimism here for a second. And I've got this visual here on the screen of the plant. And oftentimes when we hear be positive, and we think about optimists as sometimes being unrealistically positive, being positive or optimistic can feel like sprinkling sunshine and rainbows and unicorns on a really shitty situation. What the research has found over time is that optimism is so much stronger than that and so much more powerful. When we have an optimistic mindset, and there's a misconception about optimism, it means that we think, we're going to put on a happy face when that's not how we feel. That's not optimism. That's faking it. Please don't do that during this time. It's really important that we're vulnerable with others and that we accurately express what it is that's going on for us and give them permission to do so as well. Optimism in this context refers to understanding our reality and yet holding on hope that things can be different, that things can improve, and that they likely will improve, even though we're uncertain of that timeline. People that are optimistic as opposed to pessimistic have different thoughts. Those thoughts cause different chemicals to be released in their brain and body. And in combination, those chemicals and those thoughts cause us to take different actions. So if we think more positively, if we're more optimistic during this time, if we believe that regardless of the situation we find ourselves in, the situation will likely change and it will improve in time, and there's the possibility that it can get better, we're going to take very different actions during this time than we would if we believed, catastrophe. This is the end. This is something that is just going to keep getting worse. And taking actions or inaction from that place is going to lead us down a very different path over time. So the takeaway here is, are you going through some shit or are you growing through some shift? And the choice will always be yours. And I hope that you use the shit that you're going through right now as fertilizer for your future growth. I'm going to open it up for questions here in a moment. I want to leave you with some additional resources. I talked about optimism and its role in resilience. This is something that I learned from a free course now available on Coursera through the Penn Department of Positive Psychology. Dr. Karen Revich, she's fantastic. And she has a course called Resilience Skills in a Time of Uncertainty. I highly recommend it for anybody, especially if you're someone that is in charge of leading other people during this time. It gives some really great practical steps about how do we work with this idea of catastrophizing. She has a few sentence starters there that you can use to combat negative thinking or non-helpful thought patterns during this time. So check that out if it would benefit you. Unlocking Us is the podcast that I mentioned, Brene Brown's newest podcast. And I listened to the episode on comparative suffering last night. Great little nuggets in there. So if you have somebody that, if you're giving them choices about how they want to engage, this is something that you can offer up to others that you work with or who you're living with right now. And then that comic that I showed you about the 5 love languages of introverts, that comes from Liz and Molly. So their comics and blog, which you can find at lizandmolly.com /blog. Great references there. Those are gifts that you can send to others, loved ones, family members, coworkers, whoever you think could use a little smile in acknowledging what it is that we're all going through right now. If you'd like to keep in touch with me, you can do so by shooting me an email, betsy@betsybutterick.com. You can also go to my website, which is betsybutterick.com. Follow me on Twitter @betsybutterick. If you go to YouTube and you search my name, there's going to be 30 ACT videos that come up and a few other videos as well, previous webinars. ACT stands for Active Communication Technique. These are short 2-minute videos that give you something you can do today to impact the way that you communicate and connect with other people. So this has been a quick, easy hits that people have enjoyed during this time. And then you can also follow along on Instagram @Betsy_the Coach's Coach. What you see at the bottom, Winning with Words, Championship Communication for Coaches. This is a digital course that I released for high school and college coaches back in January. Starting this Friday for the month of May, I'm going to be doing a special COVID-19 sale. I know that so many of us in education, especially in athletics, have recently been asked to find creative ways to cut our budgets. One of the first things to go is typically personal development. And yet this is a time specifically where our communication skills are more important than ever. So I want to be able to help offset that cost to you. So keep an eye out for Friday when I'll release new pricing for the course. I hope you take advantage of it in preparation for when we get sports back, if it would be of benefit to you. At this point, I'd like to open it up for questions. I'll check on the chat panel here. For those of you that need to hop off or are ready to get on to the next portion of your day, thank you so much for making time and showing up. I'll send everyone a recording of today's session after it has been finalized later this afternoon. So keep an eye on your inbox, and let's take a look at the Q&A right now. So I got a question that says, popping by to say hello, envious of how quiet your home is, which has actually struck a thought. What recommendations do you have for those of us at home with family, kids, pets, etc., and are struggling to maintain focus due to background noise or distractions? Great question. Big challenge for many of us. I don't have children currently. I'd like to have them, but they're not here yet. They haven't been made. I do have a dog, but I also have the ability to close a door and have a quiet background. That is not a reality for many of you that are on the call. And setting expectations, going back to having those clarifying conversations with the people that we're going to be on calls with who are likely to be distracted by what's happening with us. This is a wonderful time of empathy and naming it. I mean, naming the elephant in the room. Hey, it's likely, I want to let you know at the beginning here, it's likely that I'm going to need to hop off for a minute to be responsive to the needs of my toddler. Or it's likely that my dog's probably going to bark as a neighbor delivers groceries because we're sheltering in place right now. Whatever it happens to be, name it, invite other people to share in your experience, invite them to support making the choice to acknowledge what it is that you're going through right now. I think having that conversation is one of the most supportive things that we can do. I saw a great sign the other day and it said, mommy is working. You can only interrupt mommy if, and it had a list of like 12 things, and it, ranged from like you're bleeding, someone else is bleeding. There's a flash sale on mommy's favorite kind of coffee. It was fun stuff, but you can create a list like that with the people that you live with, especially if your kids are old enough to read, so that you can invite them to start supporting you. We talk about what support looks like. Invite them to start supporting you in what you need to do productive work, even if it's for a short amount of time. But we get to get creative with this. Having the conversation, I think, is one of the best places to start. Another question, how do you balance being strong and modeling positive behavior for your student athletes with being vulnerable and authentic? Great question, really important question. And this goes right to the heart of an often misunderstood relationship between what it means to be strong and what it means to be vulnerable. I firmly believe that vulnerability is one of the strongest examples of strength, one of the best examples of strength. And this is something that I've talked with coaches specifically about recently, when they say, how do I lead during this time? And as coaches specifically, we think, or we feel responsible for having the answers, for providing some known information in the uncertainty, for saying this is the direction that we'll go. During this time, especially because there's so many unknowns, you can't know. Even if you have the best data and research, what we know today is likely to change next week. And to tell something of certainty, or with some sort of certainty to our student athletes, will then perhaps cause them to doubt us in the future when things inevitably change. So being vulnerable with them in the space. As coaches, we're continually thinking about, what can I do? What's the next thing that my team needs? What can I give them to provide leadership during this time? My ask is that we take a step back from finding one more thing to do and instead create some intentional space to be with, to share with them what our challenges are right now, to ask them to share with us what their challenges are. What's life like for them, where they are, and what are they going through? To sit with them in their uncertainty. And this is a big issue for Generation Z, is many of them have not had to practice identifying the difference between what is unsafe and what is unknown. And there's so much unknown right now. And being raised in a digital age, they've had the ability from the time they were very small to Google the answer to any question that came up. They can watch a YouTube video and in 4 minutes they have a new skill. This isn't something that we can Google. And when we do, some of the answers are terrifying. There's so much unknown right now that it's very easy for it to feel unsafe. So the ask here is, can you, as a leader for your student athletes, sit with them in the unknown and say, similar to that Brene Brown quote, to look back into the eyes of the people that are looking at you for leadership and say, we don't know, and this is hard, and we will get through this together, and we will walk through this in our integrity. That's what's being called for right now. To me, that vulnerability, that's leadership. So I hope that benefits you. Any other questions before we wrap up today? If you do, please drop them into the questions panel. All right. Any advice if you feel like you're no longer sitting in the unknown but are stuck? Good question. So if you have some knowns but you still feel stuck, I would go back to, what's that next step of, or you could even start with the S. So start with naming it. If you feel stuck, what specifically do you feel stuck about, and where is there room for movement? So where could you take a next step, and where is there nothing to be done at this point? That might be a place to start when you're thinking about, okay, there's some knowns here, but I still feel stuck. So what's controllable by you? Where can you take a next step if there's a next step to be taken? And what's causing you maybe to feel stuck in relation to the issue that you're experiencing? All right, that's it for today. I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Again, thank you everyone for your time. I wish you health and safety. Again, when in doubt, choose kindness. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.